The waiting room smelled like lavender and old coffee. A soft instrumental tune hummed through the overhead speakers, the kind of music meant to soothe frayed nerves. It didn't work. I sat stiffly in the leather chair, hands clasped together, staring at the small water fountain in the corner as the sound of trickling water filled the silence. Across from me, Olivia scrolled through her phone, her expression unreadable. We hadn't spoken much on the drive here. She had kept her gaze fixed on the window, her fingers drumming against her knee in that restless way she did when she was thinking about something she didn't want to say out loud. I had suggested therapy. I thought it would help. Now, sitting here under the dull hum of fluorescent lights, I wasn't so sure. A door creaked open, and Dr. Wallace stepped out, a clipboard tucked under her arm. She was in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back into a tight bun and sharp eyes that didn't miss much. "Ethan, Olivia," she said with a polite nod. "Come in." I stood first, glancing at Olivia as she took her time slipping her phone into her purse. She didn't meet my eyes. Not a great start. The office was cozy. Wooden bookshelves lined the walls, and a small lamp cast a warm glow over the space. A couch sat against one side of the room, but instead of sitting next to Olivia, I took the chair beside it. She didn't react, just settled onto the couch and crossed her legs, her body angled slightly away from mine. Dr. Wallace took her seat and adjusted her glasses. "So, tell me, how have things been since our last session?" I glanced at Olivia, hoping she'd speak first. She didn't, so I cleared my throat and answered, "Fine, I guess." Olivia let out a small scoff. I turned to her. "What?" "Nothing," she said, shaking her head. Dr. Wallace scribbled something down. "Ethan, you say things are fine. Olivia, do you agree?" She shifted in her seat, brushing invisible lint from her jeans. "I mean, sure. If fine means we barely talk anymore." Her words landed heavier than I expected. "That's not fair," I said, frowning. "Isn't it?" she shot back, finally looking at me. "You spend more time at work than you do at home. And when you are home, it's like you're not even there." I opened my mouth to argue, but Dr. Wallace raised a hand. "Let's take a step back," she said calmly. "It sounds like there's a disconnect in how each of you views the relationship. Ethan, do you feel distant from Olivia?" I hesitated. I did feel distant, but I had assumed it was just life getting in the way. Work, responsibilities, the usual stress that creeps into a marriage after enough years. "I guess," I admitted, "but I didn't think it was that bad." Dr. Wallace nodded. "And Olivia, when did you start feeling this distance?" She exhaled sharply. "A while ago." That caught me off guard. "How long?" I asked, turning to her. She shrugged. "Months. Maybe longer." I leaned forward. "Then why didn't you say anything?" Her lips pressed together, her hands curling into fists on her lap. "Because, Ethan," I did. "I've tried to talk to you about this, but you never listen. You always say it's just a rough patch, that things will go back to normal. But they haven't." I rubbed my temples, feeling the first signs of a headache creeping in. "I didn't realize you felt this way," I said, my voice quieter now. "Well, now you do," she muttered. Dr. Wallace tapped her pen against her clipboard. "Olivia, if you had to put it into words, what is it that you feel you're missing?" There was a long pause. Then, finally, she answered, "I just feel unseen." That hit harder than I expected. Unseen? I had spent years loving this woman. How could she say she felt unseen? Dr. Wallace jotted down a note. "Ethan, how do you feel hearing that?" Like I was failing. Like everything I thought I was doing right had somehow been wrong. "I don't know," I said truthfully. "I thought we were just going through a rough time, but now, I don't know what to think." Silence settled between us. Dr. Wallace studied us for a moment before setting her pen down. "I think that's enough for today. But before we end, I'd like to schedule a one-on-one session with each of you separately next time." That caught me off guard. "Why?" I asked. She gave me a small, unreadable smile. "I think it'll help me better understand where each of you stands." Olivia nodded, as if she had been expecting that. I, on the other hand, wasn't so sure. Something about the way Dr. Wallace looked at me, like she knew something I didn't, left a strange feeling in my gut. I ignored it. For now. The next session arrived quicker than I expected. I had spent the past few days replaying Olivia's words in my head. I feel unseen. No matter how much I tried to push them away, they lingered. I wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding, that maybe she was exaggerating. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had no idea what was happening in my own marriage. Maybe I had been blind to it. Or maybe I just didn't want to see. When I arrived at Dr. Wallace's office alone, the waiting room felt different. Colder, somehow. Without Olivia sitting across from me, scrolling through her phone with that distant look in her eyes, the reality of this situation felt heavier. Dr. Wallace opened the door and gestured for me to come in. "Ethan," she greeted, her tone professional but softer than before. "Have a seat." I did, settling into the same chair as last time. This time, Olivia wasn't there to fill the space beside me. Dr. Wallace studied me for a moment before setting down her clipboard. "I want to talk to you about Olivia," she said, folding her hands together. I shifted slightly in my seat. "That's why I'm here, isn't it?" Her expression didn't change. "Ethan, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. No assumptions. No defenses." I nodded. "Okay." She exhaled slowly, her gaze steady. "Do you think Olivia is in love with you?" I frowned. The question caught me off guard. "Of course," I said, though there was a hesitation in my voice I hadn't expected. "She married me. We have a life together." "That's not what I asked." Something in her tone made my stomach twist. "I don't know," I admitted. "She's been distant. I thought it was just stress, but now, I don't know." Dr. Wallace leaned back slightly, her expression unreadable. "I've seen couples come in here with all kinds of problems. Miscommunication, broken trust, resentment. But Ethan, there's something different about Olivia." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think Olivia is in love with someone else." The room went still. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. Then, the weight of her words settled over me like a slow-moving avalanche. I forced out a dry laugh, though there was no humor in it. "That's a pretty big assumption to make." Dr. Wallace didn't waver. "I don't make assumptions. I make observations. And from what I've seen in your sessions, her body language, the way she hesitates when she speaks about your marriage, this isn't just a rough patch, Ethan. It's something deeper." I shook my head, gripping the arms of the chair. She would have told me. Would she? I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Because the truth was, I didn't know anymore. Dr. Wallace's voice softened. "I need you to ask yourself something. If Olivia was in love with someone else, would you even see it?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say that I knew my wife, that I would feel it if she was in love with another man. But hadn't I already admitted that I had no idea how long she had felt unseen? Hadn't I already been blind? I clenched my jaw. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I don't think Olivia is here to fix your marriage," Dr. Wallace said, her gaze unwavering. "I think she's here to confirm something for herself." A cold chill ran through me. Confirm what? That she was done with me? That she wanted something, or someone else? Dr. Wallace leaned forward slightly. "I think you need to start paying attention to what Olivia isn't saying, because I have a feeling she's already made up her mind." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "And what if you're wrong?" She tilted her head. "Then you'll come back next session, and Olivia will prove it." But something in her eyes told me she didn't believe that would happen. And suddenly, I wasn't sure I did either. I left Dr. Wallace's office with a heaviness in my chest that hadn't been there before. The air outside felt too sharp, too cold, biting against my skin as I walked to my car. My keys felt foreign in my hands, like I had forgotten what they were for. "I think Olivia is in love with someone else." The words echoed in my mind, twisting, reshaping everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Could it be true? No, it couldn't be. But doubt doesn't need proof to take hold. It only needs a seed. And Dr. Wallace had planted one. By the time I got home, it was already dark. Olivia's car was in the driveway, and the house lights glowed softly against the night. From the outside, everything looked normal. But it didn't feel normal. Not anymore. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of vanilla and something warm. Pasta, maybe, filling the air. Olivia was in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove, her hair pulled up in a messy bun. She turned when she heard me, flashing a small, hesitant smile. Hey, it was a test. A small one, but a test nonetheless. Before today, I wouldn't have questioned that smile. I would have smiled back, kissed her on the cheek, and gone about my night without a second thought. But now? Now, I was looking for something. Something hidden beneath the surface. I forced a nod. Hey. I walked past her, setting my keys on the counter. Olivia turned back to the stove, stirring absently, her gaze unfocused. I swallowed hard. Was she thinking about me? Or was she thinking about him? The thought made my stomach turn. I leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. How was your day? She hesitated. Just for a second. A small pause before answering. Busy, she said, not turning around. Had a lot to catch up on. I nodded slowly. Did you go anywhere after work? She shook her head. Just came straight home. A harmless answer. But was it the truth? I studied her, looking for something, anything, that might betray her. A twitch, a glance, a shift in posture. But Olivia had always been hard to read. Calm, steady, even when she was lying. I clenched my jaw, pushing the thought away. I wasn't going to let paranoia get the best of me, but I was going to start paying attention. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft, even rhythm of Olivia's breathing beside me. I wanted to believe she was asleep, that she was resting, comfortable, at peace. But then, she shifted slightly, her body turning away from me, curling inward. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but it felt like everything, like a quiet confirmation of something I wasn't ready to accept. She wasn't pulling away just physically. She was somewhere else. And now, for the first time, I had to wonder, who was she there with? The next morning, Olivia was already up before me. That wasn't unusual. She liked to start her day early, sipping coffee by the window, scrolling through her phone before work. But today, when I walked into the kitchen, she wasn't sitting at the table like she usually did. Instead, she was by the sink, her back to me, her phone in her hand. When she heard my footsteps, she startled slightly and set it down, screen side down. A detail so small, so insignificant on any other day, but today, it felt like a warning sign. I walked over to the coffee maker, pretending I hadn't noticed. You're up early. Yeah, she said, her voice a little too light. Didn't sleep great. I poured myself a cup, studying her from the corner of my eye. Why not? She shrugged. Just had a lot on my mind. I took a slow sip, the coffee bitter on my tongue. Like what? She hesitated. Work stuff. That pause again. A few days ago, I wouldn't have thought anything of it. Now, I wasn't so sure. Anything I can help with? I asked casually. She smiled, small, forced. No, it's fine. Nothing important. That was another lie. I felt it in my bones. I wanted to reach across the table, grab her phone, and see for myself what she was hiding. But that wasn't who I was. Not yet, anyway. That evening, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I watched her. Not in an obvious way. Not in a way she would notice. But in the subtle, quiet ways. The way she checked her phone a little more often. The way she disappeared into the other room to take a call. The way her fingers hesitated over her messages before locking the screen. At dinner, she seemed distracted, her mind somewhere else. I tried to bring up small things. Noah's birthday coming up, a trip we had talked about taking months ago, but she barely engaged. And when she did speak, it was in half-hearted responses. Yeah, that sounds good. Sure, we'll figure it out. Uh-huh. I watched as she played with the edge of her napkin, not making eye contact. And that's when I knew. She wasn't here anymore. Not fully. Something, or someone, was pulling her away. That night, after she had fallen asleep, I stared at the glow of her phone on the nightstand. It vibrated once. Then again. I held my breath, my pulse pounding in my ears. I shouldn't, but I did. I reached for it, turning it over just enough to see the name on the screen. Unknown number. But underneath the notification, I saw the first few words of the message. I miss you too. The world tilted. A slow, creeping sickness crawled through me, tightening around my chest. I placed the phone back, exactly how I had found it, and lay there staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep that night, because suddenly, Dr. Wallace's words weren't just a theory. They were real. The next morning, I moved through the house like a ghost. Olivia acted normal, maybe a little quieter than usual, but nothing too out of the ordinary. She made coffee, kissed my cheek before heading to work, and left without a second glance. But something had shifted. I knew it, and she knew it. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my keys and left too. But I wasn't going to work. I was going to find out the truth. I parked my truck a block away from her office, far enough that she wouldn't see me. I wasn't proud of what I was doing, but I needed answers. And I needed them now. She had said she was going straight to work. So why, 20 minutes later, did I see her car pull into a small cafe on the other side of town? I sat up straighter, gripping the wheel as she stepped out. And then, he got out of a car 2 spaces down. Tall, dark-haired, dressed well. A man I had never seen before. A man she had lied about. I watched as they walked inside together, as she smiled at him. Really smiled. In a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. The sight of it nearly knocked the air from my lungs. This wasn't just an emotional disconnect. This wasn't just a rough patch. She had already crossed the line. I don't remember driving home. I barely remember stepping inside, locking the door behind me, pacing the living room like a caged animal. Everything in my body screamed at me to do something. Call her. Confront her. Demand an explanation. But I didn't. Because for the first time since this all started, I realized something. I wasn't sure if I wanted an explanation. What would she say? That it was a mistake? That it didn't mean anything? Would it even matter? My hands trembled as I sat down, forcing myself to breathe. I thought about Noah. I thought about the years I had spent loving a woman who, at some point, had stopped loving me back. And then, for the first time, I thought about what came next. Because no matter what Olivia said, no matter what excuse she gave me, I knew we had reached the point of no return. I sat in silence for what felt like hours, replaying the scene over and over in my head. The way she looked at him. The way she leaned in just slightly as they walked inside the cafe. The way she had told me she was going straight to work. There was no misinterpreting this. Olivia wasn't just distant. She wasn't just questioning things. She was with someone else. And now, I had to decide what I was going to do about it. That evening, I acted normal. Or at least, I tried to. When Olivia came home, she greeted me the same as always, like she hadn't spent her morning having coffee with another man. Hey, she said casually, setting her bag down. How was your day? I watched her carefully. Busy. Yours? She nodded. Same. Same? She didn't even hesitate. Didn't even blink. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep my expression neutral. Glad to hear it. She kissed me lightly on the cheek before heading toward the bedroom. And just like that, I knew. She wasn't going to tell me. She wasn't going to admit to anything. Because in her mind, she still had control of this. She still thought she could have both. And for the first time since this all started, I realized that the woman I had married, the woman I had trusted, built a life with, built a family with, wasn't the same woman standing in front of me now. That woman was gone. This was someone else. Someone who had no problem looking me in the eye and lying. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her sitting across from him, smiling, laughing. I saw the small, private look they shared before disappearing inside the cafe. By morning, I had made my decision. I was done waiting for Olivia to tell me the truth. I was going to force her to. And I knew exactly how to do it. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Dr. Wallace. Me. I need to see you before our next session. Alone. A few minutes later, she replied. Dr. Wallace, of course. Come by this afternoon. I exhaled, staring at the screen. This was it. If Olivia wouldn't tell me the truth, I was going to uncover it myself. And when I did, there would be no going back. By the time I pulled into Dr. Wallace's office that afternoon, my mind was a battlefield of emotions. Anger, exhaustion, betrayal. But underneath it all, there was something sharper. Determination. I wasn't here to wonder if Olivia was cheating anymore. I already knew the answer. I was here to decide how I was going to handle it. Dr. Wallace opened the door before I even knocked. She studied me for a moment, then stepped aside, letting me in. "You look like a man who's had a long day," she said, motioning for me to sit. I exhaled, sinking into the chair. "Longer than you know." She nodded knowingly, sitting across from me. "Tell me what's on your mind." I hesitated for a moment, then laid it all out. The cafe, the man, the way Olivia had looked at him, the way she had lied so easily when she came home. When I finished, Dr. Wallace leaned back, silent for a moment. Then she said, "You already have your answer." I let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah, guess I do." "What do you want to do about it?" she asked, watching me closely. That was the question, wasn't it? Did I want to confront her? End things immediately? Or did I want to make sure? I clenched my jaw, then leaned forward. "I need proof." Dr. Wallace raised an eyebrow. "Proof?" I nodded. "I want to catch her. Really catch her. No more doubts. No more excuses." Dr. Wallace tapped her fingers against her clipboard. "And how do you plan to do that?" I let out a slow breath. She thinks she's in control. She thinks she's smart. So I'm going to let her think that. A slow smile tugged at Dr. Wallace's lips. "You want to set a trap?" I met her gaze. "I want her to walk right into it." That night, I played my role perfectly. I came home like nothing was wrong. I kissed Olivia on the forehead, asked about her day, even cracked a joke over dinner. She laughed, maybe a little too easily, like she was relieved to see me acting normal. Good. She had no idea what was coming. After dinner, I casually mentioned a work trip that had come up, 2 nights out of town for a project meeting. She barely blinked. "Oh? When?" "End of the week," I said smoothly. "Short trip?" She nodded, swirling her wine glass absent-mindedly. "That'll be good. You've been working a lot lately." I studied her carefully, but there was no concern, no disappointment at the thought of me being gone. In fact, she looked calm, like this was what she had been waiting for. I forced a smile. "Yeah, shouldn't be too bad." She sipped her wine, then stood up. "I'm going to shower." She kissed my cheek lightly before heading to the bathroom. And just like that, my plan was set. She thought I'd be out of town, which meant if she was really seeing him, this was the perfect opportunity for her to meet him without worrying about getting caught. The only problem? I wasn't leaving. By the end of the week, I would have the proof I needed. And when I did, there would be no coming back from it. The night before my so-called business trip, I watched Olivia carefully. She didn't ask too many questions. She didn't seem sad that I was leaving. If anything, she seemed relieved. That was all the confirmation I needed. The next morning, I packed a small duffel bag, kissed her goodbye, and walked out the door like I was heading to the airport. I drove a few blocks away, parked in a quiet lot, and waited. Hours passed. Then, at exactly 6:47 p.m., Olivia's car pulled out of the driveway. I followed. She drove across town, weaving through side streets until she pulled into a small boutique hotel, the kind meant for discretion. My stomach turned. My fingers clenched the steering wheel. She got out of the car, smoothed her dress, checked her reflection in the window. And then, the man from the cafe stepped out of the hotel lobby. It was him. He smiled at her. She smiled back. And then she walked straight into his arms. I gripped the wheel so tightly I thought it might snap. This was it. This was the moment. I should have stormed out, confronted them right then and there, thrown everything in her face. But I didn't. I waited. I watched them disappear inside together, my heart pounding in my ears. And when they were gone, I got out of my car, walked calmly across the parking lot, and stepped inside the hotel. At the front desk, a young woman smiled at me. "Checking in?" I forced a polite smile. "Actually, I think my wife already did." I nodded toward the elevator. "Room number?" She hesitated. "I'm sorry, but we can't give out guests." I slid a $100 bill across the counter. She glanced down, then back up at me. "Room 214, she said softly. I nodded. "Thanks." I walked down the hall, every step heavier than the last. My hands felt steady. My breath was controlled. But inside, I was burning. I stopped in front of the door. 214. I didn't hesitate. I knocked once, firmly. There was a pause. Then, the sound of shuffling. The doorknob turned. The door cracked open, and Olivia's eyes widened in shock. "Ethan!" she gasped, her face going pale. She was wearing only a robe. Behind her, the man scrambled to pull on his shirt. I didn't speak. I just looked at her. Looked at him. Looked at what was left of my marriage, crumbling right in front of me. She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "Don't," I said coldly. "Just don't." She swallowed hard. "It's not what it looks like." I let out a humorless laugh. "Olivia, do not insult me right now," she faltered, her lips parting, but no excuse came. There was nothing left to say. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope I had brought with me. "Divorce papers," I said, tossing them onto the bed. "Already signed." Her breath hitched. "Ethan, wait." I turned to him. "You can have her," I said flatly. "But trust me, if she could do this to me, she'll do it to you too." His face paled. I took one last look at the woman I had once loved. And then, without another word, I turned and walked away. I didn't go home that night. I didn't need to, because home wasn't a place. And it sure as hell wasn't Olivia. Home was something I'd find again, somewhere else with someone else. And as I drove away from that hotel, away from the lie I had been living, I realized something. Losing her wasn't a tragedy. It was a relief. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt free. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe to Cheating Storytelling so you never miss an update on more jaw-dropping real-life stories. Catch you in the next video.